henceforth. Y'all, it is so good to be with you. I don't know if you know this. For a lot of us who have meetings and stuff, we don't always get to come to Mosaic. The reputation y'all have on campus is pretty exciting. It's not because any of you are super impressive, though a lot of you are, but God is doing a work here, and it's something that the community has noticed. 6 people this morning from this community told me they were praying for me today. That's never happened at a speaking engagement before. So I'm excited about the way that you guys are working together and the way that you're trying to serve God with everything you've got and enact a piece of that reconciliatory mission here on earth. So thanks for letting me be a part of that. Today we are in Egypt, and we're going to be talking about Joseph. And guys, the Joseph story is killer. I love the Joseph story. The story of Joseph is one of God's miraculous care. It's one of unexpected provision, divine blessing, and destiny. The destiny of a young boy donning a Technicolor dream coat, if you will, who becomes the most influential man in Egypt and a savior of the known world. All of these things are true. But when we pay close attention to Joseph's life, we see that it's also something else. It's a story of pain, misery, family discord, rejection, slavery, sexual exploitation, injustice, wrongful imprisonment, prejudice, betrayal, and persecution. Pain so marked Joseph's life that both of his sons' names reference his trauma. Manasseh is an ode to hardship. Ephraim is a reference to affliction. The Genesis narrative, this particular narrative in Genesis, unfolds in 4 scenes, and we're going to kind of walk through those 4 contexts, each reflecting a stage of Joseph's life. As we'll see, in each stage, Joseph is treated wrongly. In each stage, someone close to Joseph betrays him. And yet, simultaneously, each stage of Joseph's life brings him closer to the position God had uniquely equipped him to occupy. So let's start out. In the first context, we meet Joseph. It's him and his family life. Y'all, this is a broken family. And I don't mean there's a little bit of divorce and, everybody argues a little bit and they only see dad on the weekends. I'm talking about a homicidal bitterness between brothers. All right? So Joseph's first betrayal is going to come from his dearest and closest family. The story opens with an open hostility between Joseph and his brothers. We find out 3 reasons they hate him. That's how the Joseph story starts. The first one is he brings a bad report, a ra'ah report in Hebrew. He brings a bad report to his father. Hear me now, ladies and gentlemen. This does not mean it was a false report. We all assume, because of the way that his brothers hate him, that Joseph somehow must have deserved this, that he must have done something. That's the same word used throughout Scripture for times somebody tattles on somebody else. When the people come to the king and let them know about what's going wrong in the kingdom, it's a ra'ah report. He's not a snot-nosed kid. That's the picture so many of us have. No, he lets his dad know they did something wrong. The only people that lie in this early narrative are the brothers. We have no reason to doubt Joseph so far. We find out that Jacob, his father, is prone to favoritism, and he has been his whole life. Remember the Rachel-Leah thing? That's like a thing, and it is a thing his whole life. And we see that playing itself out among his sons. Who does he favor? Rachel's sons. So who is Joseph? He's his favorite. He didn't do that. He was born to Rachel. That's not his fault. And thirdly, we find out that he dreamt dreams. We find out that something miraculously, destiny has touched Joseph's life. And Joseph, for whatever reason, God has seen fit to show him that he is going to be someone who's going to do great things. And this is going to involve him having a position above his brothers. And Joseph tells his family. He's a teenager. He told his parents. He told his family. We don't have to expect that he was running around flaunting how cool he was. This is Joseph saying, you wouldn't believe what God showed me, and them hating him for it. They taunt him. They call him dreamer. So how do they respond to him? They hated him, Genesis 37:4 says, and they could not speak peacefully to him. His home life is one where civil discussion is impossible. So he's betrayed. With bitterness and homicidal anger, the brothers nearly kill him. Reuben and Judah, they have second thoughts, and they manage to come up with a plan that's slightly more humane, that's going to help him. Frankly, here's the thing. Reuben and Judah manage to keep their hands clean. Reuben and Judah say, let's not kill him. He is our brother after all. Let's sell him off. But later, guys, when they come to Egypt, they talk about their brother being gone. Why? Because they expected that he was gone forever. Man, this was homicide without any guilt. So Joseph becomes a victim of human trafficking. In the second context, we see him sold to the Ishmaelites, and he's headed out. He is headed out to Potiphar's home. He finds himself in the home of a governing official of Egypt. This is his first experience in Egypt. As he's in Potiphar's household, and the setting here is drastically different. We don't hear so much how everything is hard for him. By contrast, we find out the setting here is that God has set him in a very specific location for a particular reason. Just like the dream heralded Joseph's destiny in the first stage of his life, now the narrator emphasizes God's careful orchestration of events to position Joseph well. We hear this, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that his master, the Egyptian, noticed that God was with him, and that God caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. He made him overseer of his house, put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, in house and in field. Do you hear this hyperbolic language? So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. He just had to worry about eating. Everything else was sorted by Joseph. The scene opens not with open hostility, but a major advance in Joseph's circumstances. But as we will see, this very advance brings him closer to destiny, and at the same time, it makes him extremely vulnerable to attack. What happens in Potiphar's household? He's confronted with sexual temptation. And yet, all we hear over and over is that Potiphar's wife comes on to him. We don't hear that he was tempted. In fact, what does he say? He says, I would never do that. God has been faithful to me. I will not sin against your master, and I will not sin against my God. This is something I want no part in. And so now, the same man who was victim to human trafficking has now become victim to a false accusation of rape. Potiphar's wife says, see, he's brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out in a loud voice. Because the text is asking different questions than we are, it doesn't reflect on whether she should have been listened to. It doesn't reflect on reporting. It doesn't reflect on whether she should have been more carefully vetted. Instead, it emphasizes her instigation. It emphasizes her cover-up to protect her reputation. And this is the important part. Remember, it called him a Hebrew? And to incriminate someone more easily believed to be guilty. Every society has those who occupy the margins, whom society perceives to be fundamentally different than those in power and less trustworthy, and the source of trouble for insiders. Joseph was that man. The text emphasizes his guiltlessness and his desire to care for his fellow human, not just for God, for this fellow Egyptian. What is he repaid with? Wrongfully being incarcerated. Someone who looked like he was the perpetrator ends up in jail for something he did not do. In contrast to the story of Judah that interrupts this narrative, Judah and Tamar, who completely gave in to sexual temptation, Joseph holds out. But instead of being the promised line like Judah is, he's in jail. The third context in which we meet Joseph is the prison. In the prison, we're going to see Joseph's third betrayal. Joseph's third betrayal is not from someone in power. It's from the other inmates. Here, others who have displeased those in positions of power. others who have lived at the whim of Pharaoh, others who understood what it was to have positions of prominence snatched from them. Even as a Hebrew outsider, Joseph must have expected some camaraderie from these guys, some care, some understanding. But instead, we see them betray him and leave him in the same way. The narrator sets the scene in a way similar to the last two, a reminder that God is positioning Joseph for something crucial. Here's what we hear. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love, chesed, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all of the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. Whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Again, in a story of deception and betrayal, we find Joseph to be someone eminently trustworthy. Here, Joseph's unique prophetic wisdom to interpret dreams is accentuated. He helps the men understand their fates. Two men that the Pharaoh threw away, those two men come to Joseph. They recall their dreams. He helps them understand their faith. And here's where he says to the chief cupbearer, remember me on the outside, because I'm innocent. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, he says in 40:15. And here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. But the chief cupbearer, probably in his relief, in his exuberance, in his reinstatement when he gets freed from prison, the text says straightforwardly, he forgot Joseph. Even this person in whom he might have felt some camaraderie, who might have remembered him, even this man uses and discards Joseph and abandons him to an unjust sentence. 2 years pass. At this point, Joseph is 30. Okay? He's moved. Think about, he's our age, roughly. A lot of you in this room are about there. This man has experienced all this by the time he's reached the average age of the people in this room. The fourth context in which we find Joseph is the court of Pharaoh. Why does he come there? Well, eventually the cupbearer remembers that he has wronged Joseph immensely. This is actually the turning point in the story where people around Joseph start being convicted of the wrongdoing they've done. God, who is putting him in the right position, is also working to bring about change in the people around him. His prophetic ministry ends up being something that kind of seeps into the lives of everybody around him. And so this man remembers that he has wronged him, and he says to Pharaoh, you've been having all these troubling dreams. I know the guy for you. Let me bring him in. So this is a moment when someone who's been wrongfully accused of rape is given a chance at freedom. Y'all, it's not like he's freed him from prison yet. He's still in prison. This is his chance to advance, his chance to get out, his chance to prove his worth. Do you know how Joseph frames his gift? This is what he says. Pharaoh says, so I hear you can interpret dreams. This is what Joseph says. It's not in me. God does it. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. And then he recounts the dream brilliantly, exactly. And then later in verse 25, he says, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. In a moment where it would have been okay, it would have been expected, it would have been appropriate for somebody to say, I actually really can serve you well. He said, God is the one who does this. Let's not give me too much credit. So here, the mention of the dreams reminds us that these are dreams that he has had before. So we're already kind of in anticipation that, wait, Joseph is supposed to experience some sort of exaltation. At this point, he's still in prison, and things at this point in the narrative start happening quite quickly. This is where Joseph said, it looks like there's going to be a famine. You really need a guy who's wise to sort out everything that's going on in Egypt. You're going to have to plan. You're going to have to make sure that you have storehouses of food filled because there's going to be a problem. And we're talking 7 years. Can you imagine if our country experienced 7 years of drought, the way that would mess with the world economy? Let alone us. There are plenty of other countries in which that would be a lot even more effective. But in this moment, he just says, you need a guy like that. And this is where everything falls into place. Pharaoh says, oh my gosh, if you're the guy that can sort out dreams like this, you must be wise. You're the guy. Let me pull you in. You're the guy that I want to be in charge of this. And this is where everything happens fast. Joseph, in all of his wisdom, does exactly what God leads him to do. Sorry, it's my 5-minute timer. He does exactly what God asks him to do. He prepares for this famine. He wisely gets everything that they need. He prepares them for 7 years of famine. He prepares them so well that as the years wane on, all of the nations of the known world are coming to Egypt for food. Joseph is providing food for all of the known world at this point. He gets to the place where even the Egyptians are running out of food, and he comes up with a system where he's like, okay, listen, the government will buy your land, and then you can keep some of it, and you just need to give 5% to Pharaoh. He actually, he is responsible for the political system we see in Egypt as it progresses. Joseph is the one who pulls everybody through the famine, and what do we see? He provides a safe place for his family. This is toward the end of the Genesis narrative. The Genesis narrative has always been about, what about Joseph? What about the line of promise? So not usually Joseph, usually Jacob is who we're thinking. What about the line of promise? How is God going to preserve it? And he does. The family of Israel comes to Egypt. They find a safe place to live. They're cared for because Joseph was in this situation. That's true. But if we stop there, we have read this story dead wrong. Sure, there are 4 more chapters all about the reconciliation that happens between Joseph and his family. We cannot diminish how important it was that he protected and made a way for God's people. But listen to the way that the author of Genesis describes what he does. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. When all of the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. What he says, you do." So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Joseph to buy grain because the famine was severe. And then I'm going to read a little later on. This is actually 6 chapters later. So Joseph bought up all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe on them. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Just wait a second, we'll explain what that means. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them because they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have this day brought you and your land from Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And at the harvest you'll give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field, and food for yourselves and your households, as food for your little ones." And they said, "You have saved our lives. May it please you, we will be servants to Pharaoh." So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day, that Pharaoh should have the 1/5, the land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. Y'all, Joseph did not just save his family. Joseph saved Egypt. Joseph saved Egypt. We often talk about how Genesis is the fulfillment of the promise to the patriarchs that he would make this promised nation and that they would go forth, they would be numerous, they would inherit the land. But if we're not careful, we miss the last part of that promise to Abraham. And through you, by you, in you, all of the nations of the earth will be blessed. And here at the end of the book of Genesis, what we have is Joseph in a position where the nation who has afflicted him, the nation against whom there's prejudice, the nation who holds prejudice against him, the nation that has enslaved him, the nation that has thrown him in prison, the nation that sees him as a Hebrew to be discarded, the nation that will eventually enslave his people. That nation is the one that he serves faithfully his entire life. What does it look like for Joseph to be part of the kingdom of God while he experiences the kingdom of Egypt? It is one of submission and service. And not just that, it's one of strengthening. Joseph worked for the good of the nation of Egypt. We can step back and there's all sort of redemptive implications. We know that God used Egypt in that moment to save all of the people he cared for. We know that because of that, there was a safe place for Israel to be. But we misread this story if we don't settle into the reality that part of the good that came was just that he cared for Egypt. That is a good. They were not God's people, but they are God's creation. And he cared for them well.